Good morning. Thank you for tuning in, and welcome to Kila Chari Torah's daily review of Maimonides' 613 Mitzvot, the Sefer HaMitzvahs, for Friday the 10th of December. We're going to talk about two laws that have to do with fair employment practices. I don't know how many legal codes from the classic world have such considerations there, but the Torah certainly does. If you'd like to look at the source for these, take a look in Parsha Ki Teitzei, in the 23rd, the last few verses in chapter 23 of Deuteronomy. You'll see two verses that say as follows: when you come into the vineyard of your fellow, you may eat grapes as is your desire to your fill, but you may not put them in your vessel. That's verse 25. Verse 26 is, when you come into the standing grain of your fellow, you may pluck ears with your hand, but you may not lift a sickle against the standing grain of your fellow. So we're talking about the person who's coming in as a hired laborer. This is all explained in chapter 7, I believe, of Bava Metzia, tractate Bava Metzia, which talks about employment practices, fair labor practices, and so on. And from this, Maimonides generates two halachos, divines, if you will, two halachas. One prohibition, two negative prohibitions. We spoke some more about the positive prohibitions, about the positive mitzvot when we went through those. We are now about two-thirds of the way through the negative commandments, the prohibitions. So we have two. One is the prohibition of a hired laborer eating growing crops. The laborer is forbidden to eat from the growing crops of which he is working. One who works in growing crops, explains the note, for example, reaping it or cutting it is not permitted to eat until after his work is finished, that is, after the harvesting of the crop, as opposed to one who works on produce. Produce already gathered may eat before the work is finished, because afterwards the produce is already liable to tithe. It's a separate consideration in Mishpatim. But the Torah prohibits the hired labor from eating growing crops, meaning that the laborers may eat of that which they're employed according to scriptural law, who one's engaged upon which that is attached to the soil after the work is finished. So that's halacha number one. Halacha number two that we're talking about today is the hired worker, the hired field laborer, is prohibited from consuming excessively. The prohibition, by this prohibition, a hired laborer is prohibited to take more of the growing crops among which he's working, more than he needs for his own meal. So when he's finished, ostensibly, when he's finished his day of work, his day of harvesting, he is allowed to eat from the produce of the field. However, he's not allowed, as the verses seem to suggest, not allowed to lift a sickle up against, or not allowed to put into his vest. In other words, he can't fill his backpack with produce and take those home to the family as a fringe benefit of his employment in the field. Allowed to eat on his own, but to take for others, not permitted. Okay, we'll leave it there for today. Before Shabbos, we'll just remind ourselves that Shabbat this week, the earliest Shabbat of the year, candlelighting 4:22 p.m. this afternoon. Were we together for Mincha Kabbalat Shabbat in Shul, which unfortunately we're not doing quite yet. We're hoping to return to that at some point in the very near future. It will be at 4:25, so if you'd like to daven the same time as everybody else, 4:25 Mincha Kabbalat Shabbat. Tomorrow morning you can sign up for, if it's not too late already, by the time you see this, you can sign up for Shabbat services tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. The weather promises to be inclement, if not unseasonably warm, so take that under advisement. 10 o'clock, and we hope to conclude around 11:45 or thereabouts. The conclusion of Shabbos tomorrow afternoon is 5:29 p.m. Please join us for Zoom Havdalah at 5:39 p.m. The Zoom link is in your email, which you should have received yesterday afternoon. We have a number of classes and events on this week, so please take a look at the bulletin and read up a little bit beforehand, or just come and join the discussion. Everyone is warmly welcome and heartily invited. Have a wonderful Shabbos, Shabbat Shalom, and we will see each other at some point soon after Shabbos. On Shabbos, maybe even, or before, or after. Bye. Good Shabbos.